I firmly stand by that I had my own Dogman experience when I was 18 years old, a senior in high school. Around my house, probably a couple of miles away, no more. My girlfriend and I would go back into the woods, rolling hills, with white oak and fir trees sparsely populated throughout. The scenery was beautiful. In fact, me and my girlfriend would both go back there into the woods to make out. Her and I had both been bitten by the nature bug, so it's somewhere we really loved to spend our time. And because I grew up in a small town, there really wasn't a lot to do, especially to escape our parents and friends, who constantly wanted to suffocate us with their time. So when we had this Dogman experience, it was an afternoon like any other. Nice and sunny, clear day, probably in the upper 70s. It was later April, or maybe early May. I was a senior, and going to be graduating in probably 5 or 6 weeks, whenever the graduation was. I think it was early June, somewhere around there. My girlfriend was a junior. With the weather being so clear and sunny and bright, I know for a fact there is no possible chance for a mistaken identity of a bear. I've seen black bear many times around here. I've seen black bear tracks many times. I know what a black bear looks like. This was by no means a black bear, even though some friends that I've told this story to really don't buy what I saw. But anyway, my girlfriend and I are sitting there, under this old half-dead tree, just talking, probably lost in conversation, when I look up behind her, and I see this tall, dark figure coming in our direction from one of the hills a ways away. I was a bit startled, because in that first couple seconds, I thought somebody else had wandered back here, and where we were, to my knowledge, nobody really comes back here for any reason. Because we're such a small town, we didn't really have homeless issues, so there wasn't any bums or anything back here, or addicts. But as I finished those thoughts within a couple seconds, my brain was able to fully process a little more what I was looking at, and I realized, after no more than 2 seconds flat, frozen in conversation, this was not a person at all. It was far too tall. It was clearly bipedal, and having a large dog or wolf head, with 2 tall German Shepherd-like ears, very black in color, and kind of fuzzy, especially around the neck and head, kind of like a mane, the way a German Shepherd does, its body being much more slender, but still lean. My brain was able to process all of this within just about 4 seconds, when I told my girlfriend, "Look at that. What kind of animal is that?" She turns and gasps, as this thing now drops down to all fours, and is now running in our direction. I think instinctually, we just reacted. She screamed, I yelled, and we both just got up and ran back towards the direction of my house. We were sitting on the hill, facing downwards, south. My house was up north, behind us, up the hill. This thing was coming from the west, heading directly towards us, or perpendicular. So going north, this thing would have had to have turned up the hill to chase us. But it didn't. When we ran up the hill, neither her or I turned around to see if it was following us, and by the time we got to the top of the hill, we lost sight of it. We were both freaked out, panting, and decided to stop and make our way back to the house once we made sure that it wasn't following us and it was clear. I've never seen any animal that walks bipedally and then so effortlessly and naturally drop down on all fours like I watched this thing do. When this thing first appeared over the hill to our west, it was probably, if I had to say, no more than 100 feet away. So I know for a fact it definitely saw us. It was facing our direction. I'd say it walked maybe 20-30 feet, and then seamlessly dropped down to all fours, like it changed its entire structure and bone position, and then began sprinting at incredibly fast speeds. That's one of the reasons why we booked it. By the time we had gotten up the hill, it was gone. So it either dove down into the hill, where trees are more far and few in between, which would translate to less places for this thing to hide, or it ran into the thicker area of forest, which was to our left, or to our east. I'm not exactly sure where it went, and how we did not see it. So either two things. We either hallucinated it, or it was incredibly fast and disappeared into the thick brush. Since my girlfriend and I both saw it, both gave the same description and account of what happened. I really don't think we just randomly hallucinated something like this happening. We did not end up telling my parents or any of my friends at first, and probably not until a few years later, once her and I would both be in college, did we actually open up about what we saw, which would have made it the early 2000s, where the whole concept of the Beast of Bray Road and Dogman in general would be a little more popularized. That's actually kind of how I found out that it was a Dogman. Her and I also never heard any sounds of it approaching, no sounds of it stepping on the ground, and even once it dropped down to all fours, there was no sounds produced by that either, by it running, thudding, or moving. It's like it was completely silent, which is incredibly eerie. Having not seen it up close, I couldn't tell you any details about its face, but going on Google or online and looking at many depictions of what people illustrate as a Dogman, it's not too far off from that, except it wasn't built like a big bodybuilder or like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was pretty slender, but still lean, more tall and lanky than anything else, with the head, from far away, just like that of a black German shepherd or a wolf. And no, I did not see any eyes or any teeth. Being in the late 90s, you didn't really talk about this kind of stuff anyway, for fear of ridicule. Once my girlfriend and I graduated high school and moved into college together, we would break up, and both of us moved to different parts of the country. We stayed in contact because we were still best friends, and even now to this day, we each have our own families. I live on the West Coast, and she still lives in the Midwest. We still talk about it from time to time, and how scary it was. I know for a fact they are indeed real creatures, but as far as what are they, where they came from, and what do they act like or eat, I couldn't answer any of those. When I was around 12, my dad rented out a cabin that belonged to his friend from work. It was deep in the wilderness, accessible only by a dirt road. I wasn't really excited about going, but I decided not to let in on it. I didn't want to upset my dad. Dad was an outdoorsman. From a young age, Grandpa, his dad, would take him out hunting, fishing, all that stuff. He figured he would take me along to share those same experiences. It didn't matter to Dad that I was a girl. Dad packed some essentials, but was planning on buying certain things we needed along the way. He was told there was a general store some 10 miles away from the cabin, so we would buy stuff like firewood, milk, bread, whatever else we might need. Apparently, there wasn't any electricity in the cabin, so we would have to heat it with our fireplace. Dad even packed his .22 Winchester rifle and a little revolver. I figured we would go hunting at some point. I'd actually never shot a gun before, but Dad said it wasn't that hard, and that we could easily practice. He said the hard part was hitting something. We headed out on a Thursday, and planned to be back the following week. I fell asleep for most of the ride, and when I woke up, we were at the general store. At that point, it was night. Dad bought what he had needed, and we headed off for the cabin. The dirt road leading to the cabin was pitch black, and despite the headlights, you could only make out a few feet in front of you. Dad drove really carefully to avoid any bumps or big rocks that could easily mess up the tires. The path was way overgrown. Tree branches were sliding along the car. I tried to look out into the forest, but I couldn't make out anything. When we got to the cabin, Dad fished out a couple of flashlights. It was dark at night and freezing outside. We unloaded everything from the car and brought it in. The cabin was pretty small. There were 2 cots to sleep in, a wood cook stove, fireplace, cabinets with plates and tin cups, and a bench, and plenty of spiderwebs. It looked like the cabin hadn't been used in years. It totally creeped me out, but Dad loved it. said it felt more rustic. We put everything in its place, and then went to bed. Dad asked me if I wanted to bring the cots outside to get a good look at the stars. I said no. He chuckled. We both went to sleep. The first few days were pretty nice. We hung out, woke up early, and cooked breakfast. I hiked around the area. Dad taught me how to make a fire. He showed me how to use a compass in case I ever got lost. We even shot the guns at some of the trees. I felt pretty ready for hunting, but Dad thought I needed some more practice before we went. And we needed a license, but he didn't care about that. Dad even offered me my first beer, and I'll never forget that bitter taste, the warm feeling in my stomach. Afterward, we would drag the bench in the cabin outside, set up the empty bottles, and do some more shooting practice. Even though I wasn't excited about the first trip, I ended up loving it. Dad was usually always working, so it was the first time we actually spent time together in a very long time. At night, we would make s'mores, and Dad would tell me stories from when he was a kid. First loves, bullies, pranks that he and his buddies would pull. After the first 3 days, even though I was nervous about it, I wanted to show Dad how tough I was by taking my cot outside to sleep. Dad joined me, and we would both try to see if we could see a shooting star. That once creepy forest began to become something beautiful. One night, I could not sleep. Neither could my father. Despite being deep in the wild, we never really saw or heard any wildlife. Insects, yeah, but never deer or squirrels. Dad was worried about attracting bear, so he made sure our food was secure whenever we went out hiking. But we never saw anything. Since we both could not sleep, he suggested we get the flashlights and hike for a bit, tire ourselves out. Maybe that would help us get to sleep. At this point, I wasn't scared of the night, so I was up for it. Though Dad suggested we bring the rifle and the .22, and just to be on the safe side, in case we ran into something less than friendly. I jumped out of the cot, eager to head out. Dad reminded me to stay close, so we don't lose one another. I put the .22 around the waistband of my pants. Dad joked to be careful not to shoot myself. My dad swung the strap of the rifle around his shoulder securely, flashlight in hand. I followed closely with a flashlight of my own. We decided to hike to a little creek we had found. It was only about 30 minutes away, and then returned back, figuring that the hour-round trip would be more than enough. When we got to the creek, there was a horrible smell coming from nearby. I had never smelt something so awful. It didn't take long to figure out what it was. A few feet away from us was a deer, its body mutilated, guts spilt, and its face was torn. This made my father nervous. He suspected a bear must have done this. We began to head back, my dad staying in front of me. The .22 felt cold against my stomach. I shined the light everywhere to see if a bear was following us. I bumped into Dad, and he had stopped. I was going to ask him why he stopped, but he shushed me. His flashlight was pointed at an animal, a bear. It had its back to us, eating a deer. It hadn't noticed us yet, focused on its meal. Dad motioned to me move slowly, and we began to move around the animal. A stick had broken underneath my foot, and the bear flung itself around. That's when I realized it wasn't a bear. Its face was like a dog's, glowing from the light. It had looked like a bear because of it was being hunched over. Now, the animal stood up on its hind legs, taller than the two of us put together. It was wild and mangy, long hair, long arms, long legs. The animal began to step toward us, snarling, angry. Dad took out the rifle, firing 3 shots into the air. This startled the animal. It dropped down on all fours and ducked into the brush. Dad and I ran back to the cabin, gathered as many of our things as we could, and drove back home, right then and there. To this day, I have never seen anything like it again. As I got older, whenever Dad and I would talk about what we had seen, Dad was sure that what we saw was a bear, and that the flashlights and the shadows made it look bigger than what it actually was. Personally, I'm not convinced, and I don't think he is either. What do you think? Do you think we saw something other than a bear?